Okay, this is episode 3 of Bambergate, the explanation of why Jeremy Bamber was framed. Sorry for cutting the last one short, it was just somebody at the door, but I think I pretty much said everything that I wanted to say. Obviously, as you go through the series, hopefully you will expand a bit more your understanding of the hard facts of what actually happened, and then, as I said, the soft facts and the reasoning and the mistakes and the things that maybe in hindsight you could say, well, that was stupid, you shouldn't have done that, or things should have gone that way. But hopefully the layers that are built on top of the case, 35 years of layers and decisions that have been taken to try and manage the situation from the original set of mistakes that were made, that were reasonable mistakes, the not checking that everybody was dead, focusing on the people upstairs as opposed to checking that Shelia was actually, deceased on the kitchen floor and things like that. And why those mistakes were made, they were understandable, they were reasonable, they were things that were not included in the training, and what the police force actually did to try and avoid those mistakes happening, the responsible decisions that they take. What I'm going to do in this episode is try and talk a little bit about some of the key points of evidence, but not in the traditional way of guilty, innocent, but in the way of explaining why they fit in, why you can understand why certain pieces of key evidence had to be destroyed, because if you didn't destroy those evidences, it would be very, very easy for Jeremy to use those evidences to show that the conviction is unsafe, win his freedom, and then, of course, if you understand what the police force were afraid of at the time of conviction, which was, being ridiculed or being criticised, well, those things are now multiplied. That people would have said, well, yeah, hang on, you've not only made a mistake at the time that you convicted him, but look, these other things at the time never made it to trial, and you didn't look at that. And you'll see through this series how the mistakes have stacked up to the situation we've got now. So that's how I'm going to talk about the evidence. Where do I really start? What do I do? So as you should know if you've studied a little bit about the background of the case, is huge swathes of the evidence are placed under public interest immunity. And I'm going to do a specific episode on that, and I'm going to try and give you a good understanding of what that is and why governments use it, and the problems with using it, and the problem with using it in Jeremy Bamber's case. But the evidence as well, as you will see, there are critical pieces of evidence that are removed at critical times. Now, this has caused Essex police quite a large problem that is not fully exposed at the moment. So if you take a look on the internet, you can sometimes find these interviews where they've got somebody arrested for, let's say, murder or a serious crime. And as you well know, when somebody's being interviewed, they have the right to remain silent. So sometimes people sit there and they just go, no comment, no comment, no comment. And the officers obviously want to move forward and want to, resolve the situation. And one of the things that I remember seeing once, and it was, quite interesting, the officers said, look, we're going to show this video to the jury. We have enough to proceed with an attempt to convict you. And we're going to show them, and we're asking you questions about your wife. Now, if you're saying you had nothing to do with it, you constantly saying no comment and not cooperating paints a very, very clear picture. So although you have the right to remain silent, don't have the belief that that will resolve all your problems. And this is kind of the situation that Essex police have had. They've destroyed bits of evidence, they've edited bits of evidence, they've not allowed Jeremy to have access to certain bits of evidence, destroyed some evidence, and they've been open about that, that's recorded. But they've done it obviously over a period of time, and they've done it at critical periods. So if you understand what happened inside the farmhouse, then you can understand a little bit better to why certain pieces of evidence were destroyed. So obviously when Jeremy was convicted, there was no DNA evidence available, and it was blood grouping, and that's what was discussed at the trial. And obviously after Jeremy was convicted, we all know that DNA came along. It was a bit of a revolution in forensic things and stuff like that, and allowed a lot more accurate examination of blood and things like that. And obviously in Jeremy's situation, there was an awful lot of blood evidence. So if we take something like Shelia's nightdress, obviously Shelia was wearing this on the night, and the series of events was Shelia actually shot her sons first, and as I understand what happened, the parents or the father got out of the bed, and as he came out of his bedroom, they met on the hallway, and Neville was shot in the shoulder, and he was also shot at as he went down the stairs, as he fled down the stairs. And there's a ricochet shot, or a deflecting shot, that Neville also studied. He was able then to call Jeremy and then call the police, and that's why Jeremy couldn't get back through on the phone line. That's why the police dispatched a car before they received a call from Jeremy. That's why on the phone logs of the two calls you see two cars being dispatched, and one before Jeremy's calls. But then Shelia went inside her parents' room and shot her mother in the bed. Didn't kill her. She had defensive wounds, came out of the bed, and obviously ended up in a different position than the bed. I mean, I'm not going to go into sort of detail because there's no point. But then Shelia went downstairs with an empty gun, and that's when she hit Neville with the butt of a gun. Now, a butt of a gun is hard wood, and if you see on one of the crime scene pictures, there is the piece of wood that was broken off the butt of a gun actually in the kitchen. And in the crime scene pictures, you will see some of the shots with that piece from the butt on the floor, and some of the shots it's not there. And that was obviously one of the decisions that was made to remove any trace that the gun that was positioned on Shelia was not anywhere else in the house, so somebody moved that. But Neville suffered, I think, a broken jaw, but a lot of beating around the face with the gun, and Sheila's fingerprint was on the butt of the gun, or a palm print was on it. It was found. And obviously, we now know, or most people should know a little bit about forensics from maybe watching things like that blood splatter and certainly DNA would establish, if somebody who had, because when you hit somebody around the teeth, you have your lips and your teeth, so obviously you cut this part of the mouth and you breathe out blood spray, and Neville was quite tall and Shelia was short of the level. So Sheila's nightdress would have had a blood splatter presence, from a certain distance, a butt of the gun distance away from Neville, and obviously it would have had Neville's DNA. So the nightdress was critical when DNA evidence came along to be used to establish whether or not Shelia was stood in front of Neville when he received the wounds. Obviously, if she was stood in front of Neville when he received the wounds, then you can make a pretty strong argument to say, well, nothing was found on Jeremy's clothes, this was found on Sheila's clothes. We can be sure from patterns and DNA, it is Neville's blood, and she was stood in front of him. Most people would draw the conclusion, okay, so that tells us a very clear picture. That was why the nightdress had to be destroyed at the time that Jeremy started to look down the avenue of challenging his conviction using DNA. The other critical piece of evidence was the bullets. Now, the bullets, as again you might know from watching things, when they shoot down a barrel, they get scratched, so you can always match a bullet with a barrel, which means to a gun. You can always find out which bullets came from what guns. And obviously, again, DNA, when they're fired into people, they have obviously blood from that person, so you can always be sure that the DNA can be used to establish that the bullets came from the victims, which came from the crime scene. So the bullets also became quite critical as Jeremy started looking at DNA evidence, and obviously could be used definitively to show that more than one gun was used on the night, which of course challenges the narrative that was at his trial, that it was a one-gun crime, which, as I've explained in the previous episode, what happened with the guns, why it was made into a one-gun crime, and why that started to cause problems in the evolution of the case. So the bullets were quite critical. Now, as I told you in the previous case, Shelia actually used 3 guns. She used the air rifle, which is what she used in the kitchen, and that's why she didn't reuse the air rifle in the kitchen to shoot herself. 1, because it wasn't effective. 2, because it was a one-shot gun, and that's why she used the back staircase to get back to the loaded weapon that she had left in the box room. That's what Julia Jeeps had seen in the box room, and this is information that will almost certainly be somewhere in the original police handwritten notes. And obviously, you know, Shelia then used the primary weapon that she used was actually the semi-automatic family weapon, which was the quick firing weapon, which gave her a real advantage. And it was also the weapon that, when she had used up the first magazine, that she used to beat Neville. So the bullets had to be destroyed because they exposed this. And if you take a look at the evidence, one of the things that you'll see, the manipulation of the bullets started, or needed to be started, all the way at the trial. Now, obviously, the evidence was destroyed later. One of the things that you will see, and I think they have this on the campaign website, it's very well outlined, they will have an x-ray that Peter, the coroner, took of Shelia on the first day. And the fragments of the air rifle pellet are actually inside her neck and actually shown clearly as fragmented. You know, it's not a whole bullet. At the trial, obviously, if you want to convict Jeremy on a one-gun narrative, having a pellet, you know, the fragments of a pellet, and having the weight of a pellet, which is different from the weight of a .22 round, presented at trial evidence, obviously causes, or potentially causes, you a problem if anybody notices that. So what was done even at trial is the pellet was changed into a whole bullet. And there are some other evidence to where that came from, and some other test firings that were made on the gun and things like that. But I'm not going to go into that detail here, you know, because it's quite complicated to understand it. But that effectively is a critical, again, a step that was taken, destroy the bullets, because the bullets can be used to clear light, you know, to show what happened, or at least challenge what the official narrative is. The night dress was a serious problem. Obviously, the Bible, that's another part of the critical evidence. You know, you see in the pictures there's something that appears to be a suicide note. The Bible was used to cover up the blood spillage as Shelia was rolled into the recovery position. And again, you know, somebody took a picture. Maybe they didn't realise they were taking a picture of the suicide note. But a suicide note, again, would not be very helpful if you wanted to sustain Jeremy's conviction, or shall I say maybe if you wanted to continue to frame it. So what other critical pieces of evidence are there? So obviously you then go into what's been withheld under the different file numbers. Essex Police had a 5-week period where everything was collected under the file number the file that Shelia was responsible. This information was obviously fairly expansive, and when the decision, or however it was made, was decided upon that Jeremy needed to be framed, or attention needed to be moved away from Essex Police, they created a second file number. And again, the majority of the original file material has not been transferred into the other file. They've been very, very picky, careful to remove it. Now, of course, humans being humans, there are some bits of information that's come across that actually does expose parts of what happened. So, as with all of these things, it's impossible over a long period of time to really stop the truth coming out, but they've made a fairly good attempt. So, one of the other things, I'm just going to try and go back to my notes here, one of the other things is the pictures Now, obviously, the forensic pictures are really a way of making a record of all the positions of the various objects inside the house so people can sort of understand, and obviously before they're disturbed. And typically all forensic pictures are taken from the corners of the rooms and then on any aspect that might be relevant, you know, blood splattering, positions of weapons, positions of people, positions of furniture, or whatever, you know, whether doors were locked or windows were locked, things like that. And inadvertently, when you take these pictures, you are also going to include things that can be used by Jeremy to challenge his conviction safely. So from a very, very early stage, the management of the crime scene pictures has been very, very critical to maintaining the official narrative that Jeremy is responsible and maintaining people's attention away from Essex police. So the crime scene pictures are also critical in understanding why they have been withheld. And I think the official story now is that some of the frames were chopped out because they were overexposed or something like that. And again, that's again a way of trying to cover up what actually those pictures show. I mean, almost certainly somewhere in those pictures they'll show the positions of the other weapons and obviously the condition of those other weapons. And if obviously you can establish that they were used, then obviously those pictures create a very large problem. And this is something that, as I said to you at the start, you know, Essex police and the justice system to a certain extent are really caught themselves in quite a dilemma with this case, because to clear their name, the only real way they can do it is to release information that shows that they haven't framed Jeremy. But the problem is they have framed him. So they're in a bit of a dilemma that they now have a history of destroying critical bits of the evidence. They have a history of obviously placing, changing file numbers and resubmitting evidence that was rejected and things like that. And obviously, particularly the public interest immunity, there is a long recorded history from the trial of destruction, withholding, and things like that. So the evidence paints a very, very clear picture. I mean, when I initially got involved in the case, you very, very quickly understand that public interest immunity is really being used, you know, in the case to withhold evidence. You know, that's a legal process that I'll talk about. But I used to think, like I've heard Jeremy comment, he says, yeah, this is really the biggest problem in the case is the destruction and withholding of the evidence. And I had initially the same opinion that he did. It was frustrating. I did a freedom of information request on Essex Police at one stage asking for a copy of the public interest immunity certificate. I was trying to get to the name who had signed it. And I didn't get it, obviously, because, you know, they don't want people to know that. But I used to have the same feeling. I used to think, oh, this is so frustrating. Now I have a completely 180 different opinion that actually this is the most cooperative that Essex Police are being. And it's just down to perception. I mean, let me give you another example. Let's say somebody had been accused of a drug dealer and the police were searching their house. And let's say that the police say to him, you know, we want to search your house. And the guy says, yes, no problem. You can search anywhere except under the shed. I mean, it would tell you a very clear picture of exactly where you wanted to look and why you wanted to look under there, okay? And what Essex Police have probably unintentionally done is they've created a 35-year, very, very clear history that they have only destroyed evidence that can definitively prove that they haven't framed Jeremy Bamber. They've inadvertently cornered themselves. And this, you know, at the time of Jeremy's trial, I think somebody in the newspaper said it's a bit like Peter Sellers and, you know, the incompetence of, is it the sister? Now is it Jeremy? What's going on? What are you doing? They sense the incompetence. This is one of the things that, as you deal with the case over the years, you suddenly realize, you think, yes, okay, you have the problem initially that you've seen Shelia move around in the farmhouse. And obviously that creates the difficulty with Neville's call to the police that you can't really argue that you mistakenly convicted Jeremy. You knew that she was alive in the farmhouse, so you framed him. Now you've got a long, detailed history of destruction, editing, withholding, losing, critical bits of evidence that paint a very, very clear picture that not only did you make the decision to frame him at trial, but in the subsequent years, you've done exactly the same. And this is why I started with what I call that the Bamber Pyramid, the fact that there's 85,000 prisoners in British prisons. Very few of them have the life sentence. Even fewer have the full life sentence. Even fewer still have the full life sentence given directly to the Home Secretary, and only one ever says throughout his 35 years in prison, I'm innocent, I didn't do it. Obviously, you begin to understand the relevance of the destruction of the evidence. Not so much even in the sense that what it actually does show, the nightdress shows that Shelia was stood in front of Neville when he received his facial injuries with the butt of the gun. It's pretty clear what that would say. But more importantly, what the destruction of the evidence says is the police are happy to frame somebody. And that's really, when you begin to understand that, you begin to understand the difficulties in Jeremy being allowed to win his freedom. If he wins his freedom, then the questions start to come, what actually happened? And this is really when you understand. If you would overturn the conviction within a few years, he would have served a few years in prison and it would have been an embarrassment. Now you've got 35 years. What you're fighting for is exactly the same as what the police were fighting for at the time of trial. It was their credibility, which was really what the trial was about. It was never about whether Jeremy was innocent or guilty. It was their credibility and the confidence in the police and the justice system. Now they're fighting exactly the same battle. And this is where Jeremy goes wrong, that he fights the case under innocence or guilt, and really what the case is about is the credibility of the police and the justice system. And the evidence, tells a story like that. I've got some other notes here. One of the other things that I want to talk about, and this is something again, is the police logs. Now, at the time, if you again go to the campaign group's website, you'll see copies of logs of things. You can find these things online, and what you see is, they're beautifully written. You have at the top of the page, incident log, this log, opened by this person, and in beautiful handwriting, easy to read, who's writing it, the time, so and so called, more firearms teams called, back up to the firearms teams called, and it details, itemizes, beautifully the event. Now, the story, with the incident log is that, Jeremy had, I think, the first page of the incident log, and it's one page, and obviously the incident log was closed down at 10:30, and obviously it was started at around, 4:30 in the morning. So, the incident lasted many hours, and lots of actions were taken, and Jeremy was given one page of this incident, and he said, well, this can't be right, it has to be more pages long, and if I've got this page, I should have access to all of the pages. Essex Police initially said, doesn't exist, you've got everything. He then said, well, this is clearly not correct, because it stops at sort of, 4:50 or something, and we know that, you haven't even got to the farmhouse then. So anyway, he took it to court, and the judge found in Jeremy's favour, because initially the police said, we haven't got it, and they said, well, actually, you can't have it because it's under public interest immunity. Jeremy argued back, well, actually, it can't be under public interest immunity because I've got the first page, which means that I'm entitled to receive. So, Jeremy took it to court and he won. And actually what happened, and this is one of the critical things that, got me interested and got me a bit further down the road, and I used to negotiate with the officers and things that I was contacting. In the incident log is, the police were in conversation with the farmhouse, certain curtains were being moved, lights were being recorded as on 1 minute, off another minute, and although Jeremy had won access to this incident log, it's really quite classic. I mean, this is where it becomes almost comical, from Essex Police side. This incident log is beautifully written out, and then at the critical time of when they enter the farmhouse, it suddenly goes onto this just white piece of paper and really messily written, this happened, this happened, this happened, and then after that, the police log continues down. And I understand there's actually even a few edited copies of this police log. So, obviously the more you change facts, the more you try and cover up, the more you actually end up creating a storyline. Anyway, going back to it, Jeremy won the court case, and Essex Police were told, you've got to provide him with the full incident log of events. Now, as I said, they edited out the critical bit, which is a joke, but that tells a story. But in that case, Essex Police actually made a mistake, and they actually then sent Jeremy not only the incident log, but they also sent phone logs, radio logs, and other communication logs, which were not actually won, as I understand, by Jeremy in the court case. So, over the years, Essex Police have made mistakes, as you would expect them to. And in these mistakes, you begin to see that, even that they tried to edit out the critical bits, there are things that reveal, one male, one female found in kitchen upon entry, an additional 3 people found upstairs. And then, of course, at the trial, you've got 4 people upstairs and 1 person in the kitchen. So, things that, cause a problem to the official narrative. So I regard, this is why I try not to negotiate too much with people with the evidence and talk to people about it. I regard the evidence as it is a clear roadmap to how Essex Police have maintained the framing of Jeremy over 35 years. And more importantly, it tells you how they perceive the case today. In other words, you have this situation like Hillsborough where you say, this is a long-term problem for us. People know or have doubt to the official narrative. In Hillsborough it was very, very difficult because you had many families that were saying, our families did not go there looking for a problem. They went there to a football match, and the police were, it was the fans that, were really being badly behaved. It wasn't us opening the wrong gates at the wrong sequence. And for many years you had this problem, and eventually what happened was that the family, I don't know exactly the details, but what actually happened is the original handwritten police notes were given to actually the Right Reverend John James, and he reviewed those and said, yeah, what the families are saying seems to be borne out in these notes of stuff. And that was able then, to do what happens with, Hillsborough, that, the exposing of the cover-up and, the trials and things like that. So in Jeremy's case, because there's less people involved, and because nobody has found out what actually happened inside the farmhouse, and there's been this playing with the evidence, it's still broadly successful. They're still able to control